think we should let you start because you've made a rather interesting announcement today. Is that all out now? Does everyone know about that? Because I haven't actually looked.
It's been dented.
It's been dented. Wow. Okay.
So everyone Identica knows, I suppose. It's not huge news to anyone, I suppose, but me or members of the Conservancy, but hopefully others will be interested. I have started full-time today as the executive director of the Software Freedom Conservancy. That's an organization that I've been volunteering for about 4 years as president and on its board of directors. And starting today, I'm now full-time there.
Wow. Excellent. So that means you're leaving SFLC, and I know the main question that everybody wants to ask you is how come you're leaving SFLC then?
My focus in free software has always been to do whatever seems to be most needed. I am often willing to do the boring work that nobody else wants to do. This goes all the way back to when I started volunteering at the Free Software Foundation. I wrote to RMS, and most people would write to RMS and say, I want to work on some project. And in fact, there was this period in the mid-90s where it was really hard to actually become a developer on a free software project. It was before everyone had internet connections, and it was difficult to actually get involved. But everybody wanted to work on stuff, and there was people sort of lined up wanting to be developers. I said, well, how can I get in and be involved with an organization that I care about? Well, I'll write and say what needs doing most. I'm willing to do whatever that is. And that's what got me into free software nonprofit work in the first place back in the 90s. When I look around, I'm always looking still for what is needed most. And the service plan that Conservancy offers is incredibly needed. I've been doing Conservancy as an additional thing, as a volunteer project, while having my day job at SFLC, and it had become quite unmanageable in the sense that I spent all my nights and weekends doing Conservancy stuff, and then I had to get up the next morning and go into my day job. So I really feel like the projects do need the services that Conservancy is offering. We're getting applications all the time for Conservancy, and I hope we can do more.
Cool.
So, we talked about Conservancy before, I think. We had you on before, but can you explain again what is Conservancy? What do you do?
So the basic idea of Conservancy is it does the work of giving a free software project a nonprofit status without the developers having to do the work of forming a nonprofit organization and staffing or filling a board of directors and the other types of things you have to do to keep a nonprofit running. We basically aggregate projects into one nonprofit, and those projects get the benefit of being in a nonprofit, which in the United States means that people can donate in a tax-deductible way because we have 501c3 status, which is tax-deductible status in the U.S. And projects can get things like domain names and copyrights and that sort of thing held for them in a nonprofit so that there's no one company controlling all those things, no one for-profit company. They can do things like sign contracts. If they want to have a conference, you usually have to sign a contract with a venue. Well, somebody has to be a legal entity to sign that, and nobody wants to put their own personal bank account on the line for tens of thousands of dollars of a venue contract. So that's the kind of thing that we do. And in fact, on our website, if people look, they can find a whole list of the services that we provide to member projects, which are many various services, including, I should note, because I'm well known for this, enforcement of GPL. We do enforcement of GPL for member projects as well.
We've actually got a question from the IRC popping up already, a really good question, I thought, as well. DBS posted this question. What are the biggest changes we can expect to see in the next year or so now that Software Freedom Conservancy has a full-time director? What changes do you think this will make?
Well, I think projects who are members will notice the difference very quickly. They frequently have been quite reasonably annoyed that the response time of Conservancy hasn't been as well as I would have liked. And now that I'm full-time, I'll be able to make sure that member projects are responded to quickly and their issues are handled quickly. When you're doing something as a fully volunteer effort, things don't get done as quickly as you would like them to. So that's going to be an immediate change that I think mostly only member projects who are already members are going to notice. The other thing, and this is of particular interest to DBS because he's a leader in a member project that's currently applying, I think we're going to be able to accept more projects. We had actually slowed down our rate of accepting projects into Conservancy to try and meet the amount of resource we had. Well, with my time being available full time now, we can accept a lot more projects, and we constantly have projects writing to us to apply to become members of Conservancy.
How many projects are actually members now? Do you know?
We have 22 projects that are members. We have a number that will probably be becoming members very soon. In fact, one of the projects that you were talking about in your earlier segment, the wine project, it was one of our initial members, one of the first, actually, second member.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. So we'll hopefully Aid's been quietened down somewhere in the corner.
I have him in a stranglehold.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you is, I see you've got a new website and stuff. Who did your logo? Because it's bloody awful. It's bloody awful. No, I'm joking.
Our logo was designed and implemented by Fab himself, and is licensed CC by SA at Fab's request. I'm really happy with it. It was an idea I had for a logo a long time ago for Conservancy, and I'd been waiting for someone who was willing to work cheaply enough to execute it. And Fab is nothing if not cheap.
Yes,
you know him too well, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. So another question I have. So I think Conservancy is only for projects. Is it only for projects from the US?
No, actually, projects from anywhere can join, and we actually have many projects whose primary leaders are European. The one downside, and the reason some projects in Europe tend to prefer not to join to find a different nonprofit, is because we only have tax deductible status in the United States. So if you're a mostly European project with mostly European developers, mostly European users, people in the US could donate to you and get a tax deduction, but they can't do so in Europe. They can still donate from Europe, but then they're just donating to a US entity. So that tends to be the reason why more US projects are interested. We've looked, and this goes back to DBS's question, we've looked at how we can expand into other countries. It's very, very difficult to build a network of nonprofits that are cross-country capable. And we're looking at how to do that. We're expanding in France right now because one of our board of directors is a well-known French free software developer named Louis Dachery, and he is helping us get Conservancy France set up, and that's sort of our first experiment to try to extend internationally. And I hope we can do more of it, but it's tough going. In fact, just as a side story, we initially thought that you could form a nonprofit in any EU country and then receive donations from any other EU country and have them be tax deductible. It turns out that's not possible. So, in fact, to get tax deductible in every country in Europe, you have to have a nonprofit entity that has tax deductible status in every country. It's quite frustrating.
Yeah, EU is a fucking nightmare. One question, but you could presumably, let's say if you had an EU project, I mean, you could be part of an EU organization and then become part of Conservancy and just use it to get all the Americans to donate, right? I mean...
We've researched that with some projects. It's difficult for us to do given the way that our structure works. So when a project joins Conservancy, it actually becomes a part of Conservancy. The closest analogy is it becomes a division. It's like being a division of a company. So the project is actually operating under the auspices of Conservancy. So you sort of can't be part of two organizations at the same time when the agreements are structured that way. And we have a variety of reasons that we've chosen to structure the agreements that way, because it's obviously not the only way they could be done. We did it in part because one of the things our projects really wanted was the project leaders to have a certain amount of liability protection from personal liability when they're doing the development of the project. And the way that we achieve that is by having them be actual part of Conservancy. So they actually are operating the development efforts as Conservancy efforts, and therefore it's as if it's akin, it's not exactly the same, but it's akin to them being an employee of the company. When you're an employee of a company, your personal liability is somewhat protected. You can still be liable personally for things like gross malfeasance and that sort of thing, but if you're operating your job in the best possible way you can, you have a certain amount of personal liability protection, and that's also true of Conservancy. Of course, I am not a lawyer, and this I would ask a lawyer if you wanted specific details on that, but that's the general idea of what we're trying to do. So because of that particular need of our projects, we've structured all our agreements in a certain way that makes it difficult for them to be affiliated with two organizations. But that said, a great example is the Amarok project, which is officially a member of Conservancy, but has very close ties with the KDE nonprofit in Germany, and they do joint efforts and so forth. So those kinds of collaborations are very possible. Even though Amarok's actually a Conservancy project and is part of Conservancy, they do a lot of work in collaboration with the KDE folks.
That's good. I just have one more question about this. I mean, you did at SFLC, you were quite heavily involved in GPL enforcement, and we talked about this. Is Conservancy doing that as well? Are you still doing this? I see that BusyBox is a member of Conservancy.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the enforcement has generally been happening through Conservancy for quite a while now. For example, if you look at the lawsuit that was filed against GPL violators late last year, oh my goodness, we're coming up a year. I just realized we're coming up on the year anniversary of that lawsuit, and it's still not completely settled. But that lawsuit, the plaintiff, the person making the complaint, or the entity making the complaint, is both Software Freedom Conservancy and Eric Anderson, one of the BusyBox developers, who are making the complaint together as plaintiffs. So Conservancy has been a plaintiff in GPL violation lawsuits. It's also been doing enforcement for BusyBox. It's one of the services that Conservancy offers is GPL compliance and enforcement services. Currently, the only project that has asked us to engage in enforcement on its behalf is BusyBox and UC libc, to be complete. But we're willing to do that for other projects, and if other projects would like us to help them with their enforcement efforts, that's something that we're going to be doing. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm really glad to be full-time at Conservancy now is it will give me more time to work on GPL enforcement. GPL enforcement was only one small part of my job at SFLC, and now here at Conservancy it can be a much larger piece of the full-time work I'm doing at Conservancy. So I'm looking forward to doing actually more GPL enforcement going forward.
Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah. We have some really great questions from the IRC, actually. I've just suggested to a few people they should start their own podcast because they've got better questions than us. It's someone. Jeff G. It was asking what licenses are acceptable to join for a project to join the Conservancy. Is there any kind of aim to standardize projects on GPL v3 or anything else? What does that? How does it matter what license you're under?
Well, I think I sort of have to answer that question two different ways. I think it does matter what license the project is under, but different projects have different needs. We have not made it mandatory that projects be copyleft. Our goal has been to be as open to the entire open source and free software community, and notice I'm using both terms there, as we can be. We want any project that's legitimately operating in a not-for-profit way to make better free software in the world to be an eligible member. So our criteria for licenses is pretty simple. Basically, you have to be licensed under a license that's determined to be a free software license by the FSF and to be an open source license determined by the OSI. You have to have a license that's on both lists as legitimate licenses. Right. And if you meet that criteria, that's the only licensing criteria we have. Well, I guess it's not the only licensing criteria. The other licensing criteria we have is you can't do any proprietary software development. It has to be all free software and open source software development. But as long as you're licensed under one of the licenses that both OSI and FSF approve, you're completely welcome to be a member of Conservancy, or completely welcome to apply.
Excellent. Okay, that's cool. And I wanted to ask you, I was quite involved with the Software Freedom Law Show, which you were doing over at SFLC, and I'm pleased to see that you're going to be continuing in the podcasting vein, yourself and Karen. So can you tell us a little bit about that, what we can expect in the future?
Well, my hope is to hold that announcement for the
have I just preempted
Law Show
that?
that's
Sorry.
coming out till tomorrow. It's fine. Linux Outlaw listeners can get a preview. But we'll be talking about the plans plans for future podcasting, me and Karen, on the Software Freedom Law Show episode that'll come out tomorrow, and folks can hear about the plans for that tomorrow.
Oh,
you can't make a big announcement. You have to make a big announcement every day. You have to save one, you know.
True. Sorry, what you saying, Fab?
I said listen to the Software Freedom Law Show.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great show. So, is there anything else you'd like to mention? Obviously, anything else that you want to say to anyone who might be listening?
Well, I have plenty of things I always want to say. I love to talk about free software.
Far away.
To forever. But on point, I will stay and point out one of the big things I think Conservancy is trying to do is create a really strong not-for-profit way of operating for free software projects. We've reached an era where we have all this corporate interest, which is in fact something we work towards. 15 years ago in the free software world, what we really wanted was for people to commercially adopt free software, and we were really pushing for that and trying to get companies to adopt it and contribute to it and so forth. We've pretty much succeeded in that goal, and then there's sort of a counterbalance that's happened whereby there's a lot of corporate, for-profit corporate control of free software. Now, we can't survive at all as a community without both commercial and non-commercial activity. My belief is that the center of activity of free software development ought to be in the nonprofit space. What the nonprofits can do is provide a certain amount of neutral ground for many different companies and many different individuals to be able to contribute to a project. And that's really the sort of deep-seated goal of that I have for Conservancy, is to create that neutral ground so that projects are primarily nonprofit in nature, and then companies who come along cooperate with the nonprofit to advance the project further. And I think some of the things we see and some of the things I get upset about what Canonical does or what Red Hat does has a lot to do with certain projects, particularly distribution projects in those cases, being fully controlled by a for-profit entity. I think when you have a nonprofit entity with for-profit interest around it, that's really where you get a really vibrant and healthy free software community, and that's what we're trying to help create.
I know you're very keen on foundations, aren't you? On something we've talked about in the past, the whole idea of having as you say, a non-profit kind of foundation that would control like the IP and all the other kind of stuff, and deal with things that way, as you say.
Yeah, I think that's true. And somebody in your IRC channel just mentioned a topic earlier from the podcast, the open office issue. And in fact, what you see happening with LibreOffice is actually that. Open office never, although there was various nonprofits tried to start, and Sun before Oracle tried to create a quasi-nonprofit infrastructure for it, it never really was a true nonprofit infrastructure. And what we see with the LibreOffice developers is they've really just been scouring for a way to operate it so that multiple companies contribute. Obviously, Novell's heavily involved, Michael Meeks being a Novell employee and his team being Novell employees. But there's lots of other people, as you see on their website, who have an interest in it and want to cooperate on the code base, but having a for-profit company with its own motive and its own goals and its own ability to control the code base sitting in the middle, that's a dangerous thing. And a nonprofit is a transparent way of having a central authority for the project that basically can be seen, as I said, transparently by everyone. And that I think is a key thing that doesn't happen with corporate control projects, and it's the reason. In fact, I think it's the fundamental reason that the LibreOffice fork has happened. Was because that didn't exist for so long in OpenOffice. My goal with Conservancy is to make it available early in projects, and hope projects as they become established projects have a nonprofit home to go to.
Excellent. Now, before we let you go, I've another really cool question's come up from the IRC. DBS again has asked, as I suppose a slightly tricky question, but one that lots of people might be interested in. Yeah, he says as a paid full-time position now, as director, how does that kind of impact on the budgets of the member projects? Is there any kind of increase in that? He says, in theory, it should be easier to spread the pain of paying for an executive director across multiple projects. So I don't know. It's a bit of a strange question, but can you answer that one?
Well, I think it's an interesting question and a good one. There's a couple of threads that meet up there. One of them is the idea of the aggregator. So DBS's point of, well, maybe the pain of having to pay a staff to actually do the work, and usually this is a side point, but it's worth mentioning. In the nonprofit space, you pay staff to do the jobs that nobody else will do. It's just frank and true. Because in free software, we see this. You can always find volunteers who want to code. It just tends to be the case that people enjoy programming. I enjoy programming. I program on free software projects in my free time, and I'm willing to do it in my free time. I'm not willing to enter checks into a ledger and pay for expenses and negotiate venue contracts in my spare time, because it's not particularly enjoyable work. So when you have those needs, and every nonprofit does, Dan's right that having them aggregated and making the pain a little less is important. Now with regard specifically to how Conservancy funding works, that's something worth absolutely mentioning. So different fiscal sponsoring organizations have different models for how they operate. A great example to compare Conservancy to is the Apache Software Foundation. The Apache Software Foundation is in many ways similar to Conservancy in that they accept projects. Now, they do have to be Apache 2.0 licensed, whereas Conservancy is different. It accepts many licenses. But the key difference with Apache is that they require all donations to come to the general fund of the organization, and then projects ask the leaders of the general organization to pay expenses for them out of that general fund, and they can, of course, sometimes say no, and no specific targeted monies go to specific projects. Conservancy differs in that each project has its own earmarked account. And when money goes into that account, it's earmarked for that project, and I, even as executive director and president, don't have the ability to spend that without the approval of the project leadership. So they have to approve each expense. Now, thankfully, many of our projects choose to voluntarily donate a percentage of their funds back to Conservancy's general fund, and that's a piece of what's going to be paying my salary going forward when I officially start taking a salary. I'm not going to start taking a salary until January. I'm going to volunteer full-time for a few months and then take a salary starting in January. But when the expenses come up for the general fund, that's a big component of it. And also being able to tell to other funders, for example, if I go to funders in companies and want them to donate to Conservancy, my sort of pitch to them is quite simply, you want somebody watching out to make sure that these projects' funds are spent in a good way. So when a company wants to give to some project, they want somebody who can be trusted to oversee the administration of that funding to make sure that it actually goes to the job that they wanted to give it to. If they say they want to give to Project Foo and they want Project Foo to be improved, its software to be improved, somebody has to keep an eye on the idea that the money's being spent in an appropriate way. And that's basically what Conservancy's pitching to funders as it's doing. Now, people can also give to the general fund of Conservancy, and I'm hoping that your listeners will think about doing that. We have a donate button on our website. You can give via various means, from Google Checkout to PayPal to credit cards to writing us a check and sending it in the mail. And I hope people will give to help support my salary and help support Conservancy to be able to do this work for all the reasons that I've said. But we really leave it open for donors to pick. If you want to go to any of our member projects websites, you can give directly to the earmarked fund of that project, and most of that money, 90% or more, will go to the project directly and actually support the project. And the project decides actually how much it wants to give back to Conservancy, and usually they give between 5 and 10% of their funds when they choose to donate back. So there's lots of ways to give to Conservancy, and you can support our projects, you can support the general fund, and I hope people will. Jenna, this is another side point. I know I rant a lot, but I think people should be giving more money to support nonprofits, not just Conservancy and Conservancy's member project, but there's so many great nonprofit organizations in the free software space, like the Kuhn Foundation, the Free Software Foundation, and I hope people will start giving to these organizations more and supporting them.
Yeah. And if people want to, you mentioned that on your website there, you've got links for donations and stuff, but the address, what was it? SF Conservancy, is it?
That's right. sfconservancy.org.
Very nice logo, I must.
Yeah, I really do. I was teasing Fab before, but I really do like the logo a lot. It was my idea, so of course I'm going to like it, but he executed it very, very well, and I really thank you, Fab, for doing that.
And it's done in Inkscape, which
is
a Conservancy member.
Yeah, that's true enough, yes.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, that's a good point. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on to talk to us, Bradley, and obviously we wish you the best of luck with the Conservancy and future endeavours. I think I was talking to you about this earlier today. I think you're our first fourth-time guest.
Yes, he
now.
is. He's holding the record.
After already being the first third-time guest, you're now the first fourth-time guest.
Well, yeah, I mean, I told you guys that it was very important that I be the first nth guest, whatever n is. So before anybody else gets to 5, you've got
Before
to
anyone else
again.
comes on, yeah.
Yeah,
That's true.
You got a personal battle with 8.
I'm the N-1 guest, right?
Okay, fair enough. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for talking to us, Bradley, and all the best for the future. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot.